I play a lot of video games. Too many video games, debatably. And when you play as many games as I do, you're bound to end up developing your own habits that you usually stick to as you play. For me, I tend to try and do as much as I possibly can in a game, nearly everything as long as I'm really enjoying it. I guess I like the feeling of focusing on one single game for a long time, and seeing all the content that the game has to offer. I wouldn't say that my main goal when playing games is to necessarily 100% them, but rather I want to spend as much time in these worlds as I can before rolling credits and being done with any given game. Because of this desire of mine, there have been a fair amount of games that I've actually achieved 100% completion on. And honestly, the experience has been a bit of a mixed bag. There have been games that I've absolutely loved 100%ing, and others where going for that 100% has entirely detracted from the overall experience. Reflecting on the handful of games that I've 100%ed and analyzing how the process shaped my thoughts on these games has led me to realizing that some games are definitely more suited to 100%ing than others. Of course, a lot of this depends on the kind of player you are as well. If you're the type of person who wants to play through as many games as possible as quickly as you can, or if you just don't care about finding every little secret that a particular game might be hiding, then the enjoyment you get out of 100%ing a game will probably be on the lower side, and that's perfectly reasonable. Games are meant to be played in the way you best enjoy them after all. But I do think that the different levels of enjoyment that can be attained from 100%ing certain games over others is pretty interesting. After all my thoughts on the subject, I've come to the conclusion that under the right conditions, 100%ing games can actually end up being pretty fun. Sometimes. There are a lot of different factors that can determine a person's decision to 100% a game or not, such as the game's length, the amount of post-game content, and even the quality of its achievements or trophies, just to name a few. I think that all of these are very important aspects that make up how fun a game is to 100% for me personally, especially the length of a game. The majority of the games that I play are really big ones, usually expansive open-world games, and I end up spending a couple months on games of that nature. Although I love playing big games with a lot of content packed into them, those kinds of games aren't typically the ones I try to go for 100% on. I do absolutely like to see as much of the game's content as I possibly can, likely because I have a fear of missing out on significant content in games, but I don't really concern myself with finding or doing every single thing that I can in larger games. Like, Yakuza 0 is without a doubt my favorite game of all time. But despite this, I know that if I tried to experience everything that the game had to offer, I'd probably hate it. There's just so much extra stuff to do in that game, and that's part of why I love it so much. But trying to do every single thing in Yakuza 0 would take forever. There's such an insane variety of optional minigames in Yakuza 0 that there's bound to be a couple of them that just aren't fun for me. Ever played Mahjong before? There comes a point where a staggering amount of content can start to overwhelm me. Take Baldur's Gate 3 for example. I absolutely adore Baldur's Gate 3. It's an amazing game with a rich story, complex characters, and a wealth of content to discover. But for as much as I love Baldur's Gate 3, the sheer size of the game and the amount of unique content that was packed into it left me feeling completely overwhelmed anytime I tried to play. And that's not at all a criticism of the game. In fact, it's a compliment. If a game's biggest problem is that there's too much stuff to do, I think the devs can definitely say that they've succeeded in crafting a masterpiece. I acknowledge that this is absolutely a me problem, and that feeling that I had about Baldur's Gate 3 despite enjoying it so much was one that I created for myself based on how I chose to play the game. I explored everything I possibly could and completed every side quest available to me before progressing the story, which led to me being paranoid about missing out on content instead of just enjoying the mysteries that I naturally stumbled upon. Because of this, it took me well over a year of occasional gameplay to finally beat a single playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3. And somehow, I still ended up missing out on a few quest lines. That goes to show just how much this game offers to its players. While I was never trying to 100% Baldur's Gate 3, I wanted to experience everything it could possibly offer me in a single playthrough. I know for a fact that truly trying to 100% complete Baldur's Gate 3 would have driven me crazy. It would have required multiple playthroughs and combing over every single area of the game in even greater detail than I already had, and this definitely would have diminished my enjoyment of the game. I don't think that going for 100% completion on huge games like this is the way to go personally, but I could absolutely see the other side of that argument. For a game with that much stuff to do in it, 100%ing it could last someone a few additional months of gameplay if that's what they wanted. For people who enjoy spending as much time as they possibly can in these worlds that they fall in love with, experiencing a big game in this particular way could add to their enjoyment of the game even more, which is why it's weird that I don't really like doing it. But there actually is one huge game that I loved 100%ing, that being Ghost of Tsushima. Of course, it helps that Ghost of Tsushima is one of my favorite games of all time, but it's also one of those cases where going for true completion only made me enjoy the game more than I already had. Ghost of Tsushima makes use of every characteristic that I think applies to making a game satisfying to 100%. It has a wide variety of engaging side activities to complete, easily trackable collectibles, and achievements that are both fun to aim for as well as reasonable to accomplish. On top of this, everything that you already do in regular gameplay, like the combat or the exploration, is already exceptionally fun on its own. Even with the vast open world and lengthy runtime that Ghost of Tsushima has, going for 100% always felt manageable for me, which is another thing that makes me feel more inclined to 100% a game. It's nice to see steady progress when chipping away at a goal, no matter what it might be, and completing games is no different. But despite how much fun I had 100%ing Ghost of Tsushima, I much prefer putting in the extra time when completing smaller games. I do typically tend to spend most of my time playing longer games, but that's usually because I want to feel like I got the most bang for my buck with these games. However, smaller games are always a lot of fun to play through as well, and in my opinion, they're much better suited for 100%ing. They're usually easier to complete since they have a smaller scope, but 100%ing shorter games can also greatly extend the amount of time you get to spend with that game, and adds a decent amount of replay value to it as well. Even extending a shorter game by a couple more hours can make a really big difference, especially if it's one of your favorites. Obviously, a game doesn't need to be long in order to be good, and I've had great times playing through shorter experiences, but it's nice to squeeze a few more hours out of a game wherever I can as long as I'm engaging with meaningful content. One game that comes to mind when I think of this is Insomniac's Spider-Man 2. This is a game that I really enjoyed, but I was honestly a little disappointed by how short it was. I think it took me around 13 hours or so to beat the game's main story, and that's a perfectly fine amount of time to spend with a game. But I guess based on my expectations prior to release and how excited I was for the game, I was hoping that it would have taken me a little while longer to see the journey through to its end. So because of this, and because swinging around and exploring the open world is just so much fun in Spider-Man 2, I decided to go for 100% completion. I think I ended up with around 20 hours of playtime once I was all done completing Spider-Man 2, and by that point, I was satisfied with the experience as a whole. Even with its smaller scale, Spider-Man 2 is once again an example of a game that has a lot of engaging tasks that count towards completion, and they don't feel too repetitive even when done one right after another either. Its smaller scale and shorter runtime might even add more to the experience of 100%ing it than if it was a larger game. Another game that was a ton of fun to 100% because of its smaller size was A Short Hike. I mean, it's all right there in the title. It's a short hike. Even with having 100%ed it, Steam says I only have 5 hours spent in A Short Hike, yet every single minute of it felt substantial. A Short Hike is a game with such an amazing sense of scale, so much so that it makes its small little island feel like a vast, expansive world to explore. The island is so densely packed with content, and every action you take, whether it be a simple distraction or another step towards the top of the mountain, it feels like it matters. In a game like this, no time is wasted, no matter how you're spending it. One of the best parts of A Short Hike is finding all the golden feathers, so it's a good thing that there's an achievement for it. But collecting them alone isn't what makes this accomplishment special. Once you do finally get all these golden feathers, you have so much freedom to make use of your flying abilities that you're able to fully explore this entire island that once felt so daunting in mere minutes. This extended mobility makes finishing up any other tasks you might have missed around the island a breeze. So, by charting a course to the top of the mountain, which is A Short Hike's main objective, you now quite literally have a great jumping off point for completing the rest of the game's optional content and 100%ing it. But this feat isn't entirely a result of A Short Hike's length, but rather an effect of the game's structure. The specific way in which a game is crafted at its core can often determine how much fun it is to go for completion. That's why I'm of the opinion that a game's genre also has a lot to do with how well suited it is for 100%ing. I definitely think that there are some genres of games that lend themselves much better to the experience of completion. A few genres that I think are perfect for 100%ing would be roguelikes, Metroidvanias, and platformers, whether they be 2D or 3D. In particular, I personally think that 3D platformers that lean more on the side of being collectathons are the most fun genre of all to 100%. Mario Odyssey, Astrobot, and more recently Donkey Kong Bonanza are all 3D collectathons that I had an awesome time 100%ing. I think collectathons are perfect for 100%ing because everything about those kinds of games revolves around that central idea of collecting everything that you possibly can. It's really easy to feel motivated to search for everything hidden within these worlds because the act of simply collecting is so much fun, so why not try to grab it all? Something else that most collectathons I've played have in common that I think is a huge part of what makes 100%ing games fun is the fact that your collectibles are easily trackable, and you can see what kind of progress you're making towards your goal. Something all three games that I just mentioned have in common is that there's viewable lists that you can see at any time when wondering where a certain collectible is, so it's easy to find out if you missed anything and then go back for it when the time is right. I think that having trackable collectibles is another one of the most important factors that adds up to making it fun to 100% a game. Usually, if I'm not sure how much stuff there is to do or collect in a game, I won't end up bothering to go for 100%, because I just won't know how far I need to go. Initially, when I first started playing Mario Kart World, I was really looking forward to trying to 100% it just because of how much fun I was having with the game. I ended up doing a lot of the challenges and finding a decent chunk of the collectibles that were spread across the open world, but I eventually gave up. My problem with the open world was that other than the question block panels, there was no way to track any of the other collectibles in-game, like the P-Switch challenges or the Peach medallions. If I really wanted to go for 100%, I would have had to use some online guide, and at that point, I decided that it just wasn't worth it. Of course now, months after the game released, there's finally been an update that allows you to track these collectibles. That's great, but it really should have been there from the start, and I don't think that it's going to make me end up jumping back in. That's why I think that having trackable collectibles is so important to the process of 100%ing. It allows for the player to have a list of objectives that pushes them in the right direction without outright telling them where the collectibles are or giving them the answer. In stark contrast to pre-update Mario Kart World, all of Donkey Kong Bonanza's collectibles are trackable right from the world map, showing players the total amount of bananas and fossils they need to find, but never spoiling that sense of discovery for them. Roguelikes are another genre I mentioned that seem like they would be great for 100%ing, but admittedly, I don't have much experience with the genre overall, let alone 100%ing its games. Roguelikes aren't typically my kind of games. The repetition that's inherently involved with the process of seeing a roguelike through to the end often doesn't really appeal to me unless the gameplay loop is super strong. This is why I've only really gotten invested in two roguelikes, Balatro and Hades. Both of these games are incredibly different from one another, yet they managed to capture me in ways that roguelikes don't usually do, and I had considered going for 100% on both games at one point. Unfortunately, I did end up giving up on 100%ing both games, just because I felt like for me personally, seeing that goal through to the end would have been incredibly frustrating. It likely would have diminished my overall enjoyment with both games, so I didn't want to ruin them for myself. But for people who love roguelikes, 100%ing them could be a great way to add to your overall experience with them. Hades and Balatro are both super addictive, and there's an insane amount of content packed into both games, so focusing on 100%ing either one could add a ridiculous number of hours to your playtime. 100%ing a roguelike definitely sounds like it would be a challenge, and it would surely be very time-consuming, but if you love the genre, it might be worth giving it a try. Finally, Metroidvanias are the last genre of game that I feel would make a great match for 100%ing. The nature of discovery and exploration that's so prevalent in the structure of Metroidvanias, as well as all the different items and upgrades to find, makes progression feel really satisfying in games of that genre. I get the feeling that it would be amazing to just lose yourself in a Metroidvania's mysterious world and take your time searching through every nook and cranny. Though admittedly, I haven't quite had this experience for myself yet, so I can't say for sure. I tried to 100% Hollow Knight in the past, but for one reason or another, I couldn't quite accomplish it, though I'd love to go back and try it again on a future playthrough. Did you know that you can actually get as high as 112% completion in Hollow Knight? I sadly only ended up with 105% on my save file with the highest progress. Wait, so did I technically 100% Hollow Knight then? Well, in my mind, no. I don't know exactly what it is I'm missing, but I simply haven't seen everything that the game has to offer yet. And there's a bunch of achievements that I haven't unlocked either. Speaking of achievements, that's another great metric for measuring whether a game is worth 100%ing or not. Once you've rolled credits on a game, achievement hunting is one of the main things that'll keep you around as you're aiming for 100%. I know that there are plenty of people that love achievement hunting in almost all the games they play. In contrast to this, I've also seen plenty of people who feel that the inclusion of achievements in their games breaks their immersion and takes them out of the experience. I myself lean more on the side of appreciating achievements in my games, although I don't always make it my mission to try and grab every one that's available. The quality of the achievements available in any given game is often a signal of whether or not a person should even bother trying to complete it in many cases. In most games, you'll end up getting a decent amount of the achievements just by sticking to the game's primary objectives, but there's often a good handful of more obscure and difficult achievements that are only meant to be found by the most dedicated of players. Despite this, a lot of games have a solid amount of throwaway achievements, some of them even being those harder ones to obtain. Achievements tied to luck-based drops, repeating a specific activity a certain amount of times, or grinding for a ridiculous amount of some in-game item or currency are some of the worst achievements you could come across in my opinion. They all sound pretty similar, but these kinds of achievements exist only to artificially pad out gameplay time as opposed to being there to present the player with a unique challenge as they aim for completion. In addition to this, any missable achievements or ones that require seeing specific endings of a game can be pretty frustrating to come across as well. While achievements like this aren't inherently bad, they ensure that a player isn't able to obtain all the achievements the game has in a single playthrough. Though, structuring a game's achievements in this way does incentivize multiple playthroughs, which plenty of people love. Playing through your favorite game multiple times is something that a ton of people do, but for achievement hunters specifically, I don't know if they'd want to fire up multiple playthroughs of a game one right after another just to get a platinum trophy. I can't really hate on these kinds of achievements too much though, because they do without a doubt provide unique, meaningful content to the players who seek them out. Achievements tied to multiplayer can also be a hassle to run into. Obviously, they're right at home in primarily multiplayer games, but in games where the majority of the content can be accomplished by a single player, it can be really annoying encountering an achievement that arbitrarily requires you to be playing with another person. I remember having this problem while trying to 100% Sackboy: A Big Adventure. I was dedicated to finding all the collectibles and getting all the achievements, but there are a handful of levels spread across the game that are multiplayer only. If I cared enough, I probably would have asked a friend if they wanted to help me with those levels, but this requirement ultimately left me asking why bother, so I ended up giving up on that platinum trophy. I would say that the best achievements in a game get the player to interact with the game world in a unique way, or have them prove their skills in interesting challenges that most people ordinarily wouldn't interact with. Of course, there's always going to be those trophies that are tied to story progression, and they'll always belong, but the ones that aim to provide the player with additional exciting content are the best of their kind. While it is admittedly a very specific way to engage with a game, going for 100% completion can often provide mixed results. Under certain conditions, it can enhance the experience and allow the player to engage with the game's world in a more meaningful way. But on the other hand, the process can lead to frustration and burnout, potentially detracting from an experience that would have ordinarily been an enjoyable one. Although all the topics that I've discussed so far do act as components for what makes 100%ing a game satisfying in my opinion, there's no one-size-fits-all definition for this topic. There are absolutely more factors that could potentially add to the fun of 100%ing a game. These were just a couple of them that I thought mattered most when it came to my own completion experiences. Also, some people just might not enjoy 100%ing games. I'm still not even necessarily sure if I do or not. But I think that it's always important to remember to try and engage with games in ways that'll bring you the most enjoyment. Don't play a game in a specific way just because others tell you that's the way it's meant to be played, or that you absolutely have to see all the content that the game has to offer. If speeding through a game as quickly as possible is your preferred way to play, go for it. If you just want to see a game's main story through to the end, enjoy that story to the fullest. 100%ing a game can be a trickier balancing act than it might initially seem, so if the thought of that stresses you out, maybe just don't do it. Or maybe do. You might just find a new favorite way to play some of your games. Experimentation with different gaming habits such as 100%ing could potentially end up being even more fun than you imagined. But no matter what results experimenting with 100%ing leads to, it's always important to remember to enjoy the ride.